So this may seem like an odd title, right? And thanks, by the way, for everybody for being here. Um, Conflict, the hidden fuel for your agile success. So I'm Joel Foner. I've been in the business for long enough that I describe it as 15 plus years, not to scare anybody. I've done all kinds of things and have been an agile coach. I've done executive and management coaching and organizational troubleshooting. And I started to realize a couple of years ago that there were these patterns I was running into and had figured out some techniques for how to deal with them that were starting to be really effective. And it's one of those where it wasn't hypothetical. It was I realized that 2 or 3 clients in a row, there were similar things going on. And I guess a couple of years ago, what hit me is all of a sudden, conflict wasn't spinning me up anymore. I used to be the kind of person that something would show up in front of me and my head would be half stuck in the ceiling. And now when it happens, I just get curious. And just as a starting point, one of the large organizations I worked with was especially good at triggering that effect for me. And one day I came up with this model that I call the 3 TV show model of the world, and I'm hoping it's useful for you. When something would happen, I just think about, well, okay, which TV show is in front of me as a way of giving me a little distance from the scene. And what I landed on for that engagement was it was either an episode of General Hospital or Game of Thrones or some free comedy network. And, it turned out to really work well because, if you walk in and you look at yourself and say, okay, it's a Game of Thrones day. The only real job is to make sure I don't get thrown over the north wall. And other than that, everything's okay. So, and recently at another client I'm working with, I decided that maybe a part of their world is the old Andy Griffith show. I don't know if anybody's been around for long enough to see that. The deputy who sits at his desk and can't even quite figure out what the desk is, let alone how to do anything else. So if that's helpful to you, feel free. I found it's changed my world a little bit. But that's not the primary thing here. I guess I wanted to really walk through some ideas about conflict and connect that to agility and how we can be more successful. I thought at first I might ask a question. How's your transformation going? Anybody want to comment? How's your transformation going? Does this picture resonate at all? Feel free to open up your mic and talk.
Good days and bad days.
Good days and bad days. Some days it's a dumpster fire and some days it's okay, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So I saw this one. I couldn't resist starting with it because I know so many of us walk in literally, figuratively, virtually at the beginning of the day and say to ourselves, oh no, it's another dumpster Friday. Okay. So, but where do we go from here? Why? Why is that the picture that is so resonant for us? What are some thoughts on that? What do you think? But I really do want this to be interactive, have some discussion here. What do you think?
Poor communication.
Poor communication. Yeah. Yeah. What else makes this stuff hard? Why does it sort of tend towards Game of Thrones and dumpster fires?
Transparent objectives. Why is everybody motivated to be here?
Uh-huh. Yeah. One more?
I'm going to say that we don't pay attention to little things until they turn into big things.
Uh-huh. Like it was a pack of matches, but it has to become the dumpster fire before we pay attention.
Or before everybody pays attention, yes.
Before everything, right, exactly, right? Yeah, there's all kinds of reasons. And, I thought I would bring out a couple of things. And I'm curious, what do you wish you could change? If you had a magic wand and you could just wave the wand or tap the screen and poof, something were different. What do you wish you could change? Feel free to put it in chat or speak up on your mic. company culture, resistance to change, more change champions. What else? People would be more open-minded. Yeah. I know this is a bunch of Agile folks. Somebody wants to talk. Go ahead and unmute and say something.
I wish everyone was aligned with my goals rather than having conflicting goals.
I wish everyone was aligned with my goals. Alignment shows up here a couple times. Engagement. Everyone sees need for change. Better understanding of the process. Okay. Cool. So that's some interesting stuff. I thought I would, more collaboration. Yep. So, got conflict. I figured I'd do a riff on the got milk thing. Got conflict? We all do. It runs into it. Now, I guess one of the questions is, what is conflict? What does that look like? It can look like this. Anybody want to tell me the story about what this is about from a conflict perspective? How could
avoidance?
that be? Go ahead.
Is it avoidance?
Yeah, it could be avoidance, right? We put on the mask, we sit down. What you see is not what's going on inside, right? It could be all kinds of things, but it's clearly not transparent.
Good cop, bad cop.
Good cop, bad cop. Yep. Yep. Is this better?
Yeah, no one's speaking up.
Yeah. We've seen this before, right?
Every day.
Would it be weird to call that conflict to you?
No.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. We often think about conflict. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
The disengagement that happens.
Yeah.
When either people are, they want to avoid conflict or just make it stop once it started.
Yeah. I mean, often, when we talk about conflict, often this is the picture that comes to mind, right? But actually, there are all kinds of conflicts that show up that aren't as visible. The kind that look like this, the kind that look like this. How about the kind that looks like this? So I'm kind of curious. What's your read on this when you see this? Go ahead, just surface. Like, what's your blink reaction?
The anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Disengagement.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's in witness protection.
Witness protection. Yeah.
Probably Zoom burnout.
Zoom burnout. Yeah.
Everything's fuzzy.
Oh, good point. Yeah, I was trying to protect the. Right. That's the witness protection program part, right? The blurred out letters.
Only one person's talking.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a lot of working remote and people not feeling comfortable being on camera while they're home?
It's interesting that we always point to the technology when we're on Zoom. And yet, how different is that than this?
I think there's too many people too, unless it's a broadcast.
So I just want to point out, okay, so now I've just had this screen up here for a minute or two. And how many different stories do we have about what's going on here? It probably, I didn't count, but like 8, 10, a dozen, somewhere in that range. Mm-hmm. Which one of those is truth?
Or maybe different.
Yeah, at least a few.
At least a few. Okay, could be. Yeah, so this idea of us making up stories when we don't have data, that's kind of how we operate as a species, right? When we don't have information, we're going to make up something to fill the void. So, when we're working in organizations, we got all that going on. And then, is there something powerful in the way of you doing your work? Do you ever feel that way?
Mhm.
What is it? If you were going to put a name on it, what's this powerful thing that's in your way of doing the great work you're trying to do?
Bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy?
Misalignment.
Misalignment?
It's just like fear.
Fear?
Overloaded workload.
Overloaded workload. That's a great phrase.
Lack of
Yeah.
understanding.
Uh-huh. So everybody has a different feeling of what's this powerful thing that's in our way, right? There are lots of things in the way, and what we've had on the chat is resistance to change, closed-minded leadership, status quo, structure. And then we hear things like, when I talk to Scrum Masters, product owners, coaches, I've done a bunch of coaching and training all around, and along with stuff that I do in companies, management won't fill in the blank. Does that sound like a common impediment?
Yeah.
How about they don't get it?
Yeah.
How about that? How about somebody else saying back to you, that's great, but you have to realize,
Mhm.
am I getting too close to the core here? How about when we have more time? I know it'll end soon, but I had to bring some reality to the room. And this is kind of my reaction to that. It's like, what? Because those things, what's your, like, when I flip through these again, what kind of emotions does this stuff raise for you? What kind of feelings does it raise?
Just boxed in.
Boxed in?
Frustration.
Frustration. Yeah. What else?
Discouragement.
Discouragement.
Mhm.
Tell me a little more about that. Why discouragement?
Mm,
And it's okay if you don't know. People often have feelings and they're kind of like, I don't know where to place that, where that came from.
yeah, I don't.
I think
Okay.
people are
So focus on what you can't do, and that as opposed to focus on what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because what you can do is encouraging, what you can't do is discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
It's emotionalization. Usually they just don't even have the conversation. That's
Mhm.
their way to object without continuing the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking for, oh, here it is. Somebody put this in the chat, so I figured I would find the picture and put it up. The face palm, yeah. So there's all this kind of stuff going on, and I kind of feel like the puppy dog saying, meh. But then I have a different question. Are you sure you aren't the driver of the bulldozer?
What does that mean?
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. As if you've seen the movie I, Robot, that would get the response, and that's the right question. So, what this idea of conflict as fuel, we have a lot of reactions to that stuff that I just put on the table, right? That stuff stirs up a lot of stuff for us. If I go back to this stuff, how does this stuff make us feel about the person who said it?
If they're in control.
They're in control.
Little victim mentality.
Well, they're driving the bulldozer at that moment.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Like, and in chat, they're an obstacle. Yeah. So our inner stuff is that they are the problem, right?
Well,
Huh.
they're the root, but then we feel the consequences of not getting it done.
Okay.
And you can't go to seniors and name, blame. Can't.
Yep.
You need to be solution based.
Yeah. No, I realize, by the way, this slide, I realize, is probably slightly triggering. I get that. It might be a little purposeful. Because, what we're going for here is we're going to be actually doing a little reflection about what we are actually doing as change agents. So conflict as fuel. Where's the source of conflict? Where does it come from?
Maybe internally?
Misalignment of understanding, not
Yeah,
having a shared understanding.
yeah, different viewpoints.
Okay, yeah, different viewpoints. That came up in the chat too. Diversity, internal.
Different agendas. You want different outcomes.
Uh-huh. So it turns out there are a ton of places that conflict comes from, right? We kind of feel like it's, and I have to say, I'm just going to say this. You look at the outside world these days, outside of these squares in this meeting, it feels like no matter where you go, there's conflict everywhere. You can't take a step without it. Well, okay, there's a lot of stuff out there, but where is it coming from? Have you ever had okay, we're going to do this as a little chat thing. How many people, and just put a yes in chat, put a yes in chat if you've ever had a conversation with somebody where you agree on the thing you're talking about, but the conversation goes sideways and melts down anyway.
Mm.
Many people, oh, yes, says David Henson. Yeah, this one raises some energy. Okay, so now I'm going to ask a question. The frame of that question was, we agree on the thing we're talking about. Where did that conflict come from? We agree. How can we have conflict? And yet we've all most of us have experienced it. What do you think?
We might agree on a certain outcome, but we might be not agreeing with the way to achieve the outcome.
Yep. Could be. Yeah. Different approaches to get to the agreed goal. Yep. What's the assumption? So David, you said, different, and a couple people have said this, differences in approaches on getting to the agreed goal. What's the assumption in the frame of that? And I'm using the word frame consciously.
I think people wanted to be heard or felt that they hadn't been heard sufficiently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
By the way, could I share a little story about
Sure.
how we handled that at one company? The place where I used to work, we would often, have a discussion, and after a while, it would become apparent that we were all in agreement, but we'd keep on going anyway. And so one of the guys used to signal everybody that we're doing that by, he'd pound the table and he'd say, "No, I agree. No, I agree." And we'd all laugh because
no, I agree.
The whole thing was
That's
silly,
awesome.
but that sort of became a thing. It worked pretty well.
Yeah. So, but that's actually kind of cool example, right? That emphatically, this isn't about the thing we're talking about. Right? So that's one of the conflict patterns where the thing isn't the thing. Or as Johnny Depp said in Pirates of the Caribbean, the problem is not the problem. So sometimes what we're doing is we're arguing about something that has nothing to do with the thing we're talking about, right? And so it turns out there are a bunch of these patterns. Another one might be my story is better than your story.
Well, I have a statement or a story maybe to share, and I don't know if it's even related to the problem is not a problem phrase. So we have a requirement to create a minor error handling condition to the existence of a document.
Okay.
Right? Whether it's published or not. And some of the developers think that's a bad requirement because they say, well, the document will always be there. But I kind of sort of argued, you're assuming it will always be there.
Mm-hmm.
What happens?
And that's a kind of a story, right? Somebody's asserting, by the way, it sounds like you've got a lot of background noise there. Is that I'm trying to guess, is that a coffee maker?
I'm actually walking on the road, sorry.
Oh, no problem. Oh, that was a bad guess. In any case. So, yeah, I mean, that's in some ways, that's a story, right? Somebody made up this story about the story and said, I'm asserting this thing. And so the argument is actually about some story they whipped up in their head. There are many of these. And actually, so when I've talked about this stuff, I've got sort of a compendium of stuff that people could learn about. Let's go forward a little bit more, though. So where's the source? Is maybe an interesting question. Does conflict have a shape? Pear. Oh, yeah, Daphne. Pear-shaped. Yeah, okay, cool. And by the way, we're not necessarily talking about I know these are geometric shapes. I had to find a picture with shapes in it, right? But it could be any kind of shape, right? Jagged edges, angular, spiky, pyramid. Yeah. Can you always tell what shape an argument is?
Probably not.
So
I actually did not know there is a shape for a conflict.
Oh, sorry.
Some of the arguments are circular. They just come back around and.
Oh, yeah. So conflict can be circular, right? Yeah. So we got this interesting thing, right? We've got this idea of conflict. In some cases, it's got a shape. In some cases, we have some sense of where the source comes from. The question I always come back to is not, how do I blow up the conflict and make it stop? The question that to me is the really interesting one is, what is this trying to tell you? What is it trying to tell me? Because the conflict came from somewhere. I'm going to say that again. The conflict came from somewhere. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say, I don't know, Kara, you and I are talking and all of a sudden one of us lights up and it starts to sound like conflict. Well, that didn't come out of nowhere. It came from somewhere. And what one of the things to maybe do is to trace back, the tape recorder in the head. What happened just before that? That's probably a really important piece of data. Because that might tell us something about what is this conflict trying to tell me? Where did it come from? So I'd like for anybody who can remember a particular, and by the way, not just conflict, but argument, disagreement, sort of anything along that spectrum that they've been in recently. If you do that little game of thinking about, okay, where it erupted and what happened just before, possible to remember one of those and maybe tell a quick little story about what that looked like? Oh, come on. One of your teams exploded in the last week or two. I know it. I was just working with a team who described their planning sessions as a bloodbath, and I'm quoting.
Mine's tomorrow. We're having a big ambush.
An ambush. Okay. So Chris, is it Christopher or Chris?
Yes, Chris, is fine.
Chris, yeah. So Chris, when there's an ambush, what happens just before?
Quiet.
Quiet.
Mhm.
Oh, so we're back to
No
that
more
picture of the
conflict.
people standing there like this, right?
Mhm.
And what happens just before that?
Oh, there's a lot of chatter before that.
Yeah. So one of the questions, sort of when that happens, you know, when either the room goes quiet or explodes, those are both indications of something, right? If the room all of a sudden goes quiet, what just happened? The thing that just happened before that was probably the trigger.
Right.
Right? So we're starting to get closer to this idea of conflict as fuel. What if you could have X-ray vision into what's going on in your teams? Conflict gives you the radar to figure that out. Right? So the challenge here is we start off thinking conflict is this obnoxious thing in the way of people being difficult, of people trying to stop us from doing our good work. But maybe this argument and conflict, whether it's quiet or loud, is actually the environment trying to tell us some important things about how we can work. And now I'll be quiet for a minute. What do you think?
Can you repeat? I'm not sure I'm following.
I can try. I know I can't repeat the actual exact words because I'm more of an intuitive pilot when I do these things. But so our normal first pass reaction to conflict, arguments, things like that, whether they're loud or quiet, is often to look at the person who raised it and say, there's a problem there. They're being obnoxious. They're being difficult. They don't get it. You know, all those phrases at the beginning that I put in the slides? But what if that were actually your X-ray vision to figure out what's going on instead of a thing to be angry at?
So I think that's a good point. I had something like that happen this week with a very key team member. I always have people preface, well, I know I'm getting ready to derail this meeting. Or
don't you just love that? Sorry.
Yeah, or you know, I just have to get this off my chest. I know this is not the purpose of this conversation, you know. So the person said that, you know, they got it off their chest. We listened.
Yeah.
I was curious.
Yeah.
And then they came back again and again.
And again.
And you know, and it's funny because at a certain point we just realized until we gave that person something or made sure that they heard that they knew they were heard. Like this person just wanted to be heard. By the way, I did invite him to our Agile coffee, so he's going to attend there now so he can come and talk there. But he needed a space to talk, and that was something new that I've done recently. Because usually, I try to cut that off, but I just let it happen, and it was okay. It turned out okay.
Yeah, and that's yes, and I think there was Mithun put in the text, and I'm hoping I got your name correct in terms of pronunciation. Reflect before shooting the messenger. Yeah. So you know, it's funny. I Dan Mezek and I chat a bunch, and he reposted one of the Agile New England announcements about this, and said something that just sort of I had to laugh at. Anything from Joel Foner is going to blow up your current beliefs, and not everyone is ready for that, but maybe you are. I'm hoping I'm delivering. So, okay, so what is it trying to tell you? That's kind of an interesting question. I've spent years working and learning on this, right? What is conflict trying to tell me in this situation? It turns out there are distinct patterns. Yeah, Pepe, go ahead.
I'm curious to what do you make of? I'm trying to connect the dots and like the shapes of conflict and the ensuing question, right? And what do you make of this sort of like stages of like conflict at this stage in my career? I see that as a symptom, and I usually see it as someone that is frustrated and doesn't know how to communicate or has communicated and feel that he or she has not been heard. And then this depending on the personality, it comes this explosion. But when I was younger, I saw conflict differently. I saw as someone that it was aggressive, and I had the tendency to escalate because I myself, I'm conflict friendly. So any comment about this journey? I mean, not all conflicts are the same. So what are the receptor and emitter of the message? So any comment, any insights?
Many. I'll have to choose. One actually is from a discussion from yesterday about cultural differences about conflict. That different communities grow up sometimes with very different views of what is conflict and how that's expressed. Some cultures and communities actively create what some others would call conflict as a way of showing affection. So you combine that with somebody who is conflict averse and treats it as a threat. Okay, well, that's kind of a big issue, right? Because these two people have, and I'm going somewhere with this, these two people have patterns that have nothing to do with what they're talking about that create massive emotional responses on both sides. So it turns out there are a large number of these things that are wrapped around the things we talk about that, if they're misaligned, can trigger those kinds of things. One of them is that thing about, conflict forward, conflict averse, and there's all kinds of other ways to look at that. Another is the person, for instance, who's oppositional. The one who, no matter what you say, is going to tell you why you're wrong. We've never met anybody like that, right? We don't have any of those in any of our teams, do we? So
I think there are gender differences too. There's always a dynamic there.
True. Yeah, and although I'm less convinced than I used to be that gender is the primary linkage in some of this stuff, because I've seen so many counter cases on both sides. I do agree there's a general tilt. You know what? That's a good point. Thank you. That was Kara, right? Yeah. So where did my, okay. I'm going to riff on Dan for a minute and do some paper point. So, when we have one of those polar opposites, people are very rarely totally on one end or totally on the other, right? There's a line and there's a spectrum in between. People are often somewhere on that line in terms of their preferences and patterns. They might be highly situational. They might be based on things that are either in the room or outside the room. So as an example, can you think of an example where somebody might walk into a meeting and present as conflict forward, but it didn't come from the room where you're all sitting? Yeah, so Phyllis, you nodded your head. What do you think?
Well, these days it's a virtual room. So sometimes you can just, sometimes I read their face and you can just see they had a very difficult meeting prior, or something happened in their home with their dog, their cat, their child, their spouse.
Exactly.
So, and you don't always know, but it doesn't have, it didn't come from you, but something's not right.
Right. Well, and that's great, right? Because I'm going to tie back to, we talk about agile metrics. Wait, what? He's talking about all this people stuff. Okay, if we talk about agile metrics, they don't answer questions, right? They ask questions. To me, conflict is like that. It's what is it trying to tell me? It's not telling me exactly what the answer is, but what you just said. It is telling me something's there. And I want to kind of understand what that is. Sometimes it comes from outside the room. It has nothing to do with anything that happened inside the room. And that's another thing about conflict, is if we assume that any kind of conflict actually came from inside the room, we could get in big trouble, right? Anybody think of why might I be saying that? How could assuming the conflict came from inside the room create problems in a conversation?
So
It forces you.
Go ahead, Julie.
One instance that I've seen that come up a lot is when someone listens with a specific filter. So, for example, there's one of my teammates who grew up with a very critical family. So you can say the most kind observation that's not at all a criticism, and she will just go berserk, and she will completely mishear anything anybody says the second she gets a whiff that, oh my God, I am being criticized.
So Julie, do you mind if I listen critically to what you said and replay a couple things for conversation?
Absolutely.
So the other thing is I've become a real student of the choices people make in language. Right? So part of that was she, has this thing, and whenever she feels and then you said, and she goes crazy.
Oh, a little judgment there, huh?
And it was followed by a little more icing. Yeah. So, but yeah, so it's, and we do this, right? If somebody doesn't follow our patterns, we do this as a matter of course until we become used to paying attention to it. And what do you think that does to the conversation from that point forward, even if we don't say those words out loud?
Yeah, sets a tone. It creates.
Right. It's a story, right? I've all of a sudden created a story in my mind that this person is out of control. They're trying to destroy the world. And I did nothing. I am pure. I am innocent. Thanks for playing. But so this way, and it's part of why I got into this is a couple of things. The work I'm doing, I think, is different than what a lot of people are doing. It has very clear results. And one of the coaches I used to work with said a year or two ago, Joel, I know you're always working on 4 different dimensions, but I never know which dimensions they are. And so what I started thinking about is how do I start putting that down so I can help other people learn to work that way? Not because you want to be totally distracted by the 53,000 things going on, but because it gives you more opportunities for how to be effective at the things we're trying to do. Right? So I'm going to move on because we only have about 15 minutes. So is there a path through conflict? By the way, Julie, if we could follow up just one quick thing here. So I said that. What was your reaction to how I said it?
To how you said it versus what you said?
Uh-huh. Like, what was your reaction to the experience of me making those comments?
For one thing, I felt caught out.
Okay.
And a little embarrassed.
Uh-huh.
A little bit.
Yeah.
The other, I felt grateful to have, my awareness raised.
Uh-huh. What could I have done differently that would have made you instantly angry instead?
If you would have said it more harshly.
Uh-huh.
So and shamed me.
What would that sound like for you? Oh, by the way, if you don't want to do this, feel free.
No, that's fine.
Pushing,
it's fine.
Yeah.
Nope,
Okay.
nope, it's good.
Yeah.
If you had been more judging yourself, if I would have felt that you were coming from a place of that's hard. I don't know. I can say what worked, but it's hard to say what wouldn't work.
Sure. I mean, I can construct an example if you want, and please.
Please.
Okay. So, not meant for real, right?
Yep.
But I'll give you a role play.
Okay.
That was about the most insensitive thing I've heard in the last week.
Okay, yeah, that would do it.
How's that for a polar opposite?
Yep.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
Or if you would have said you screwed up or you were insensitive.
Oh yeah, I could have amplified it even further.
Yeah.
You saying that thing was the most insensitive thing I've heard in the last week. Right? Good point, right? So what I'm doing, to the other point of the other discussion, is I'm constructing a story and casting it out there as real. And now you have to defend yourself against a story. Does this feel like what's going on in the public space these days? Okay, so let's go back to here. Is there a path through conflict? Yeah, there are a bunch of paths through conflict. And one of the ways through conflict is to better understand what's going on in front of you. Right. So what you just saw me do, being able to do that role play and the back and forth and the very picking things apart, and the fact that, Julie, you were talking, but in the back of my head, I was listening to the structure of the conversation along with what you were saying. And there are some skills in there that are like driving a car. You remember when you first learned to drive? The first day you were behind the steering wheel? If somebody said to you, okay, you've driven 50 feet, now I'm going to hand you a hamburger and a cup of coffee, and I'm going to talk to you about something going on in the outside world while you're driving, what was your reaction be? And no way, right? Just no way. Now you can do that and text and whatever all at the same time, and everything's fine. But the point being that these things that I'm talking about actually are like that. Once you get used to them, they run as a background process on call when you need them, so that you can kind of see in multiple dimensions at once what's going on in a conversation. to me, that's one of the secret sauces through conflict. It's not the highfalutin models about organizational transformation and change. Yeah, sure, they're useful. You got to motivate an interested group. You got to communicate the vision. But if people are displaying open conflict, that chart of the 7 things you're supposed to do at the organizational level is not going to save you, right? So, and it's not that that stuff is unimportant. What I'm really saying is that here's this additional thing that has, for me, transformed the way I do what I do. And the people I work with have been noticing it. And I'm finally figuring out a bit about how to explain it. Okay, so let's go a little bit forward. So how do you get, and by the way, some of you said frustration. That's the word that I keep getting shot at for it's not the right word for me. For now, I'm using frustration. So how do you get from frustration to progress and happiness? I think there are 3 things. It's being able to sense differently. It's being able to recognize patterns that are connected to conflict. And understanding what these options are that are brought to the surface once you start to understand the world that way. So there are lots of other pieces of this. So for example, somebody mentioned circular conflict earlier on. I forget who it was. Was it Kara? I think, yeah. So do you have an example of a circular conflict? And feel free to pull it outside of Agile, wherever.
I think if people get tired or frustrated, they repeat back to a previous position or to rehash something.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to think, or like you had said, if somebody, I think somebody else gave an example of somebody that has personal patterns due to the way that people interacted with them when they were growing up, then you revert back to your training when you're stressed or tired, or your impulse where you're acting without thinking consciously about it.
And, to your point, I've found that becoming a student of this stuff has helped dramatically with not getting spun up by stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's actually not just me. I've worked with a couple, frankly, every person I've coached over the last 3 years has, within the space of the first few months, started telling me about changes in their personal life. And this is part of what's driven me to start going public with this in a larger way, because I think I'm here to try to help with that. And so what I'd like to do actually is an example. Now, I didn't really do this on purpose for this session, but as it broke out on LinkedIn earlier today, I thought to myself, oh man, this is a great example for this session. And it ties to Agile. So I guess it's something that people might be able to identify with. I'm sure, I'm not sure, but I suspect it'll get people cranked a little bit. So there was a conversation on LinkedIn where somebody said that they don't think SAFe is a lightweight process framework like Agile is supposed to be, but at least it delivers important functionality every 3 months, blah, 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 better than waterfall. And of course, that dragged all kinds of people out of the closet, right? Because anytime anybody mentions SAFe, you're good for a knockdown drag out. Well, yours truly figured, you know what? Sometimes I kind of feel like a cat with a ball of yarn. I said, it's fascinating to hear the, quote, this is not Agile at all, unquote, rhetoric so much when SAFe team level mechanics are explicitly Scrum or Kanban. You may have objections to how companies tend to implement, parentheses, turn it inside out, or what you think it's about, but saying it has no Agile elements seems like a stretch to me. So what do you think about that comment? Did it sound like it was loaded?
Fuel on the fire?
Do what? Fuel on the
Fuel
fire,
on
right?
the fire?
Yeah. There were people who were cranking on the, safe is anti-agile, that campaign, right? And by the way, I'm Kanban certified, I'm safe certified, I'm Scrum. It's like they all have their stuff. But so one person said, with all due respect, if you just include Scrum as iterations in safe, it does not make you agile. That's a fallacy of thinking that you use the word Scrum and you're entitled to be called agile. How does that play into the things we just talked about in this session? What did you hear in that? Do you want me to I can post it in chat if you want, if it's easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So here's that.
It's kind of a no true Scotsman argument for one, right? Like, please define what Agile is. So,
right. So here's this story. He's basically saying, if you just include Scrum as iterations in safe, what's he doing? He's projecting that story onto me to try to make it sound like that's what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then arguing with me, except he's actually arguing with himself. Now, if I took up the bait, what would that look like? If I really just was ignoring all the stuff we were talking about and I was just like, oh, I'm spun up, I'm going to answer, what might I say? Oh, come on. We're all good at being internet trolls.
Just double down and say Scrum is Scrum.
Yeah, Scrum is Scrum. What the heck are you talking about? Right? So what I actually said was this. Please help me to understand. If a team is practicing Scrum as designed, yet operates in a non-Agile environment, are you saying they're not practicing Agile? What do you think of that response?
Questions are good.
Uh-huh. It's also framed as, I'm not going after you. I'm trying to understand this. Want to guess what the reaction was? This was fun. Let me tell you. What do you think the reaction? Just an idea of the kind of reaction or the tone of reaction I might have got to that.
I'm going with the dismissive.
Uh-huh.
Either crickets or he doubled down.
Okay, here we go. Not sure to answer question, but if your entire company practice some top-down approach and you have one island of the company practicing Scrum as designed, the island of agility won't survive long, and I've seen that. What just happened there?
Straw man.
Uh-huh. So he's like holding up this thing again, the same pattern, right? And then somebody else piled on, of course. There's a name for that, water scrumfall. I don't know who invented it, but I've heard it first from Gojo Ajic some years ago. So
that has caused Scrum to fail when they start mixing those things together.
So just a quick question. Are we actually talking about the thing that I put in print at the beginning?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Completely avoided. Yeah, avoidance.
Right. That's, by the way, one of the tip-offs. When somebody refuses to engage in the thing that you brought to the table and instead throws something else on the table, right? Spin the tape back a minute. It probably means they don't have a reasonable answer to the thing you said. So they're putting something else on the table. So
almost the same story that I had this morning.
Okay.
Where it's the same story about that, a content that we need to put an error handling on, right? One of the developers that I was working with said, oh, I thought you're the one who created this requirement. And I said, are you nuts? I'm not going to create added work for us.
Right. So in that case, he handed you the hook and you chomped on it, right? Which was, he created this story like, oh, Randy, it's your problem. And you're like, wasn't me. And so that is one of the patterns that can get people cranked. Yeah, it's you do. I mean, on some levels, you got to say, hey, that wasn't me. You're accusing me of something. There's a deeper thing around that we're going to we have run out of time to really go into. What I wanted to show you also, though, is what I said next, which is I asked, and so what I did here is I said, you know what? Rather than saying you're being jerks, you're not answering my question. I just said, okay, I asked a specific question about the team level and explicitly excluded the larger frame, which you're now re-adding to invalidate the point. That is not clean logic for what it's worth. Please answer in the original frame. If the team is practicing Agile in the form of Scrum in a non-Agile environment, does that mean they're not practicing Agile as a team? At this point, I'm trying to see, like, you know, what if for anybody who's played chess, right? I had the checkmate 4 moves ago, but I'm just kind of playing around with which kind of end game we're going to do, right? So any guesses what the next comment was? So here's another non-answer.
Did he agree with you?
This is it. It just said, you do not believe I've answered your question? Interesting.
Completely passive aggressive.
Right? And now, by the way, there's now 2 people trying to pile on here. So that was one of them. And then the other one said, you answered that it's water scrumfall without addressing the original. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was me. You answered that it's water scrumfall without addressing the original frame of a team that's practicing. Blah, blah, blah. That doesn't seem to be an answer to the original question. And so then, by the way, this doesn't go too much longer. Well, not too many more comments.
Hey, Joel,
Yeah.
can I ask a question here? Because my head
Sure.
is really spinning through this argument
sure.
here. And what was the original question or original conflict?
Good point.
I'm lost now. So if you could just kind of reset that.
Where did we
Because
start?
I'm seeing a lot of arrogance here, and so I just want to understand what's going on, really.
Yeah, like what did I do to trigger all that stuff, right? So the original question, it actually was a comment, really. It wasn't even a question. My comment was, it's fascinating to hear that this is not Agile at all rhetoric so often when safe team level mechanics are explicitly Scrum or Kanban. You may have objections to how companies tend to implement it or what you think about it, but saying it has no Agile elements seems like a stretch to me. So what does it mean that these folks were so spun up by this? Like what is this trying to tell us? If we ask that question, what are their responses trying to tell us about their worldview?
Well, you never asked this person what they thought their view of Scrum is.
Yeah. Oh, and by
right?
the way, this was not a response to them. It was just a post as another comment in the stream on this original thing.
Yeah, it just comes across as we're just kind of trying to out-lawyer someone.
Yeah.
That's my impression here, right? And so it's not really an effective dialogue. I don't think it's really getting to a real understanding of what that comment really was, because it's interjecting some terminology, and it's not really asking, hey, do we have a common understanding of what you believe Scrum is, for example?
Yeah, because that's
and what you
not
believe
actually-
Agile is, right?
To the point of, so Lisa asked, it actually relates directly, what does this LinkedIn thread relate to the slide we're looking at regards to 3 points? To these 3 points, we're actually sort of reaching back into the deck for some other stuff before here. But in terms of types of conflict, I would argue that this is one that basically is the talk about something else because you don't like the original. Where this eventually landed, through all kinds of other back and forth, was a final comment that was basically, I have to go find it, but the final comment was basically, well, yes, that actually would be Agile, but it won't last long. So, but the point I'm getting at here, really, what I wanted to tie together is we often get lost in these arguments at work. You know, where somebody takes a starting position, somebody throws some smoke in the air, and we go chasing the smoke. And then they keep blowing more smoke in the air. We keep chasing the smoke, right? And the approach I was taking in this was actually just to keep objectively pulling us back to the original. Not taking up the smoke, just saying, you know, actually, this doesn't sound like the question I asked. Here's the comment I made. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? What do you think about that? And after enough times, they're like, okay, I give up. Yes, I basically agree. Now, you know, was that a productive use of time? Meh. You know, I was actually kind of curious just to see what would happen with it. But in terms of frustration, if we don't recognize that as a pattern that people sometimes play as a game, we'll let ourselves get all spun up by it, right?
Well, Joel, let me ask you a question then.
Yeah.
So what was your role in that game then?
So my original question, frankly, was a real question. I was curious to hear, you know, why is it that people are saying this is non-agile when explicitly SAFe says that the core team layer is standard Scrum or Kanban? I wanted to understand what their rationale was for saying none of this is agile.
Yeah, but you didn't phrase it that way in your discussion with. It didn't seem you phrased it that way. You know, I mean, when you look at the Agile Software Manifesto, right, it values individuals and interactions, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like this was really conflict around terminology, and it disrespected the importance of individuals and interactions. So that's kind of my take on it. I have a different take on it. I don't think it was really exploring where this person was really coming from. It was instead assuming that this person had an understanding, or must have an understanding rather, of exactly what Scrum is. And I think that's kind of my personal challenge with Scrum is, yes, it is kind of somewhat rigid and highly defined. I understand why that's important, right? But maybe this person didn't really fully understand that. Maybe they didn't value it. Maybe they're coming from a different set of values around.
Yeah. So because of time, I didn't actually put out the whole conversation. There were about 12 comments prior to this, and people had sort of landed on this comment that SAFe is entirely anti-agile. And so that's really where my comment came from, is I was reacting to a thread of people saying SAFe is totally anti-agile. And I was just saying, look, I'm not saying it's perfectly agile at all, but you know, it does look like the team level mechanics are supposed to be straight ahead Scrum and Kanban. So like, where's that coming from?
So, let me interject. If someone makes a claim in real life, online, wherever, it's up to them to back the claim up at the same time, right? He's giving them a chance to back their claim up. That's how I interpreted it, right?
Yeah, it's like, you know, okay, you're making this claim. Can you show me some evidence? Only I didn't want to put it that way because that would have been more aggressive. So I mean, you know, as George Box would say, every model is wrong, but some are useful. Maybe this example wasn't perfect, but I thought it was an interesting illustration of some of the stuff that we were talking about throughout the session. And, you know, ways, I guess, as also that we have choices in how we work with conflict. One of the choices is to address the surface level comment as if that's the totality of it. Another choice is to start unpacking some pieces and decide, okay, do I want to try to understand the pieces? Is that my goal? Am I trying to convince the other person of something? Do I want to just say, I think they're an idiot? You know, it's like, these are all choices. And, you know, it's funny, when I'm doing Agile work, people are peppering me all day long with, What should I do? What shouldn't I do? What's the right thing to do? And I always tell people, I really have very few answers. One of the answers is you as a human can do anything you want. Every choice has side effects. Which side effects do you prefer? And what I'm trying to do is move the ownership and responsibility for actually thinking about improvement to the person I'm working with instead of them having me pick up that load. Which is maybe another way of, because could you see that somebody's saying to me, like if Rachel, if you said to me, let me pick, what's the thing that drives me bonkers every day? How should we do story splitting? What's the right way to do it? If you say that to me, I could give you an answer, right? But your probable first reaction would be to say, no, I disagree because. As opposed to, yeah, let's talk about this. Let's learn about it. What are the options? Where does it go from here? So that's an attempt to see if we could get to progress instead of staying stuck in the conflict of who's right. So I'm hoping, we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff. I'm hoping this has been helpful. Questions, and I guess, Pepe, you're back. Do we have a couple more minutes?
You have we'll have a couple more minutes. It's a good time check. It's at 8:12.
Yep.
We can go into like 8:20 and then.
Oh, okay, easy. Yeah.
Have someone else.
Yep. Cool.
Given or provided that there's no another, you have not contemplated like question and answers since this session has been very interactive.
Right. I mean, I was actually literally just going to go there as like, so are there other questions, thoughts? What do you think of all this? Has this been helpful?
It's been super helpful, but it feels like it's just the very edge of a conversation that needs a lot more.
Guilty as charged.
No, it's just a matter of there's only so much time. It's not.
Right. Yeah.
No, I mean, what I meant is that it's a very, very intriguing set of ideas that I'd love to dig into more.
Cool.
I think trying to have us define the shape of conflict was a very interesting exercise because it takes you outside of the conflict.
Uh-huh.
That was interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. So we asked at the beginning, how does conflict make you feel? I'm curious, how did this session make you feel?
Well, it made me feel curious to find out how I can apply it and what the results can start to look like when you start to see it work instead of just conflict back and forth.
Would it be okay if I tell a quick story in answer to that? So the team I mentioned that described their planning sessions as a bloodbath, that might be a good starting point. I was brought in because the organization had done some work and this team really was having issues. And, I listened a little bit and I realized, okay, so they're having some of these core issues that we've been talking about in how they talk to each other. So I did a little bit of listen and micro teach engage during some discussions, where we just sort of have the discussion. And up front, I'd set the stage to see if I had permission to hold it for a sec in the middle of the discussion if I heard something interesting. And so we did that. They went and they and boom, okay, hold for a sec. Can we just replay the last two sentences? What happened there? Right? And I then had, over the course of about a month, I had a set of sessions, probably 3 sessions with the team as a whole, individual sessions with a couple of the senior people who were always at each other, to help them understand some of these models and how this stuff works. And about 5 weeks later, we had a meeting, and this stuff doesn't get fixed quickly, right? So I'm kind of figuring, yeah, it'll be a while. And I asked them, so how did your planning session go this week? And one of the senior people, who was always saying this is a bloodbath, looked at me kind of puzzled and said, Joel, I am not quite sure what's different, but it's basically working. So, being able to get that kind of progress in the space of a few group sessions and a few individual sessions, I think is an example of what some of the power of this looks like. And they say on the late night infomercials, who knows, maybe results not typical, but I keep seeing these kinds of things show up. As an example, another example from another place, had a manager I was working with who was, well, the team was really feeling micromanaged through the floor. The manager was thinking they were doing the right thing, right? I mean, when you listen to the story from their perspective, it's like, of course, if I were them, I'd be doing exactly what they're doing. Makes total sense. And so I sort of thought about which different ways of understanding what's going on I could bring to the table for them and for the team. And again, about a 60-day cycle, the heat wasn't totally gone from the room, but people were reporting, yeah, this isn't totally fixed, but it is way better than it was. So these are the kinds of things that are making me think that, the reason I mentioned in here Scrum Masters and product owners and RTEs in the pitch for this session is, you're the folks who have your hands on the teams all the time. It's one thing for a coach to say, y'all should do something different. But if I could find a way to get to the folks who have their hands on the teams and help them with this stuff, imagine what we could do. Right? So I don't know, Stephen, does that answer? Go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
that I tend to do is ask myself, who's benefiting from the way it is now? That, is fine with the way things are working.
So I'm sorry, I missed the very beginning of your sentence. So
Ask who is benefiting from the way, if you're in a cycle, who benefits from that cycle?
Yeah, totally. And that's part of it, because I'm sure you've seen this too, teams collaborate in pinning the current system in place. Right? You're trying to quote unquote help the team, but they keep making sure that things keep going the way they're going. And so you have to kind of figure out, who am I actually trying to serve here? Why am I here? If I'm here because I'm trying to serve me, well, wait a minute, what am I really doing? So there's some other deeper questions that go along with that. But yeah. Stephen, I know that was a really long answer, but did that answer your question to some level? Yeah. Okay, cool.
And it's a quick time check. I'll let whomever was going to speak up finish the sentence. Okay. It's 8:19, so we're getting close.
One more slide I'd like to show right before we close, if that's okay, after the next question. Cool.
Hey, Joel, this is Jim Alley. I have a question.
Yeah.
So if you ask the team a suggestion through SAFe or through Agile, the Scrum way, like, oh, well, I've had teams in the past that have done tasking. I've had teams, and you suggest that to the team. And I've had teams that have break down stories. And they say to me as a group, well, we want to use PI planning, in SAFe as the time to do the estimates, because that's where you want to show 80 to 85% and show that you can complete that work for the futures. And they keep the estimations throughout the PI.
Okay.
And they say, Jim, why are we changing? It works. We like it the way it is. Okay. And but my point, Joel, is it's for the team. And as long as the team member has a good point, the process that they're using now works.
Yeah.
So what do I say as a Scrum Master to say, I'd like to make a couple of new suggestions, but the suggestions can be valid, but the team wants to wait on those suggestions. That's up to them, right? Or how do I approach that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ways you can approach it. I think one thing is that people only change when they're ready to change.
Good point.
You could have an incredibly valid point, but it's not the right time yet. And some of the work I've done actually is really been, it's changed me a lot about that, even in meeting settings. As a coach, I've gotten used to the idea that I'll say something and the team will walk right past it, or the group or the meeting, as if the words never came out of my mouth. And rather than reacting, it's just like, wonder if this is the wrong time for that.
Yes.
And magically, 10 or 15 minutes later, or the next day, or the next week, it shows up again. Right? It wasn't the right time for that to be the thing for them to work on.
Cool. That's a good answer. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So one thing I just wanted to put up, where do we go here? Wow, what happened to Zoom? There we go. Is, I have this idea and I'm wondering if anybody wants to join me. This is actually, I'm putting together a group. This is going to be ultimately a paid membership. So it's not going to be a freebie, but it's going to be a working group for ongoing stuff where we work these issues and learn how to do them. I don't quite have all of it together. This is going to be sort of a launch of putting pieces together while we're flying the plane. So if anybody's interested, feel free. And by the way, you get a PDF of 3 secrets. It's the 3 things, a couple of the things we talked about plus another. This is not a commit, but it's just, to be on the email list where you'll find out some more about what that's doing, what's going on with that. And the reason I'm thinking about it this way, to the points that got made is when I sat down to think about what do I work through when I'm doing this work, it turned into 14 different topic areas. And so I don't have a way to package that into here's a quick sheet and you have the tips and you're off and running. And I've found that it takes practice to get there. And so that was the reason for thinking about putting something like this together. That's really a long-term looking to do self-improvement, purposefully not about certification kind of thing. So if you're interested, please feel free. No problem if not. joelfoner.com/3secretsane. Thanks. And thank you very, very much for having the time to talk and actively being a discussion. That was great. Thank you.